voyaging people made this their home. The story of the Polynesians is an epic natural history. Man and nature, each shaping the destiny of the other. The Polynesians were the most intrepid voyagers the world has ever known. In giant double-hulled canoes, they ventured eastwards to the islands of Tahiti and the Marquesas in the center of the Great Pacific Ocean. From there, these island people set out north and south in search of unknown lands, beyond the distant horizons of their ocean world. With them, they took the plants and livestock essential for their survival, not just for the long journey, but to establish a new life on a distant shore. Chickens, dogs, and pigs became reluctant but vital companions on these, the most ambitious voyages of Polynesian exploration. For many generations, Polynesian people had lived on the Marquesas, a rugged and remote group of islands just south of the equator. Here, a unique island culture still celebrates the courage of their ancestors who voyaged between these remote islands with their precious living cargo of plants and pigs. Polynesian people reached the Marquesas Islands more than 2,000 years ago. Without the crops and livestock they brought with them from their ancestral homeland in Southeast Asia, they would not have survived in these remote tropical islands. As with all oceanic islands, the forests contained few native animals and plants that they could eat. Breadfruit, imported by their ancestors, became a major part of their staple diet. The resourceful people of the Marquesas cultivated many different varieties of this prolific tree and devised ways of storing its nutritious fruit. Filled with salt water, the peeled and cored fruit were left to ferment and then cut and trampled in preparation for long-term storage. This was the proven Marquesan way of making provision for famines and for their long voyages in search of other islands. Wrapped in dried leaves, the fermented breadfruit became a packed meal that could sustain the ocean travelers for weeks. Just as important was the preparation of seeds and cuttings vital to their survival when they arrived. All Polynesians were expert gardeners, understanding the special needs of their valuable crops. Many, such as breadfruit and banana, could only be cultivated from living shoots or roots. To survive a long sea crossing, the plants needed meticulous care by their green-fingered cultivators. Generations of experience had taught them how to equip themselves for the hazardous adventure that lay ahead. The entire community helped prepare the cargo which would be the foundation of a new life. We cannot be sure what made them leave. Devastating storms or famines, wars or family feuds. Perhaps it was simply the Polynesian voyaging spirit that drove them on. Their ancestors had voyaged eastwards from Asia to Tahiti and the Marquesas and remote Easter Island. Epic ocean crossings then took them to New Zealand and Hawaii, the most distant corners of the Polynesian Triangle. To reach Hawaii from the Marquesas, a canoe must sail for more than a month across perilous winds and currents. Many must have perished in the search for new land. For all Polynesian voyagers, setting out into the unknown ocean was an extraordinary act of faith. Like all remote islands, those of Hawaii rose from the depths of the ocean as a chain of fiery volcanoes. A hot spot in the Earth's mantle pumps molten rock through cracks in the ocean floor. As it erupts at the surface, the red-hot lava spits and hisses until, quenched by the sea, it creates new land. As the bed of the ocean moves slowly to the west, the oldest islands erode and sink beneath the sea. At the eastern end of this geological conveyor belt, 1,600 miles long, are the newest and largest islands, including the one known simply as Big Island. This was the fire pit of Pele, the Hawaiian goddess of fire. These specks of land are thousands of miles from any continent. Like beacons, they attract life. By chance, blown on the wind, come new immigrants, each arrival a triumph. The giant Hawaiian silver sword takes 20 years to reach this height. It flowers once and then dies. A sheen of silvery hairs reflects the intense sunlight that scorches the peaks of the volcano. On a neighboring island, another plant, the iliao, has a striking resemblance to the silver sword. Both have the same origins, but each has evolved in a slightly different way to suit the local condition. There are some 1,000 species of flowering plants on Hawaii, all derived from just 270 original colonists. The iliao and the silver sword evolved from a small tarweed blown in from California and still display their sticky ancestry, protection from pests. Hawaii's insects have also become unique in their form and behavior. From one founding fruit fly evolved 600 distinct species, each with a slightly different wing pattern and mating dance. The display is important in establishing both identity and territory. Only if her partner's dance is recognized by the female will she mate. Losing the power of flight is a common feature of island evolution. Hawaii has spectacular examples. Almost every group of insects, from crickets to predatory wasps, that winged their way to these remote islands have since evolved a flightless form. This wasp has no wings at all. It drops its prey. Unable to take flight, it must pursue another meal on foot. Hawaii has all manner of flightless insects. Most of their continental counterparts failed to make the long ocean crossing. The few that did arrive evolved to fill each ecological vacancy. This is the most bizarre, the Hawaiian flightless fly. Another unique emblem of Hawaii is the happy face spider. On its abdomen, it carries a permanent smile. From its coastline to the summits of its fiery craters, Hawaii is one of the world's great living museums of evolution. Hawaii has celebrated its isolation by an explosion of life. Every corner of this remote archipelago has been filled with new forms. Millions of years ago, a flock of small finches from a distant continent was blown by a storm and landed in the forests of Hawaii. Here they radiated into more than 50 different species. The palila, with its heavy bill, perfect for tearing seed pods, is most like the ancestral finch. But after many generations, new species evolved. Today, we know them as Hawaiian honeycreepers, each unique to these islands, and each evolved to take best advantage of different sources of food. This one, the Akiapola owl, pursues insects. Its bill is ideally suited to probing wood and teasing out grubs. But the forests of Hawaii are also rich in flowers. One honeycreeper has evolved a bill perfect for sipping their nectar. The head of the iiwi fits the native lobeliads like a hand in a glove. For birds, Hawaii was paradise. With few predators or diseases, their offspring survived more easily into adulthood than their continental counterparts. Like Hawaii's insects, many became flightless. Here was a gentle world of fearless creatures, delicately adjusted to living on the most remote group of islands in the world. For those first Polynesians who came to these shores some 1,600 years ago, Hawaii was a dramatic discovery. Beyond the smouldering skyline of Big Island lay other islands, cloaked in forest. With the first human footfall on the shores of this isolated paradise, the natural history of Hawaii was set on a new course. This first invasion also included the plants and animals brought by the voyagers from their homeland 2,000 miles to the south. Whether by design or by accident, all manner of livestock arrived with the first voyaging canoes, including the ubiquitous Polynesian rat and the indispensable domesticated chicken, both traditional Polynesian foods. Their act of faith had been rewarded. Their gods had guided them to a new homeland. In time, these remote mountainous islands would become the most productive and densely populated part of Polynesia. Hawaii's people became Polynesia's most successful cultivators. With only the simplest of tools, they modified the natural streams and exploited the slope of the terrain, diverting water through an elaborate system of aqueducts to supply their homes and to irrigate wet terraces for their root crops. In this land of sunshine and water, their traditional taro plants flourished. On no other islands was this tropical lily cultivated in such profusion. Just as the breadfruit had been the staple crop of the Marquesas, here planters of Hawaii developed several hundred varieties of taro that became the key to their agricultural success. Around their gardens, they grew many other food plants, from sweet potatoes to bananas. Successive waves of voyagers from the Marquesas and Tahiti came with additional crops, including the breadfruit. The native plants of Hawaii were of little use as food, but had great practical value. The giants of the forest were the koa trees, whose red, mahogany-like, wavy-grained timber was ideal for building and for making boats. The tough basalt rocks of Hawaii's volcanoes provided material from which the craftsmen fashioned stone adzes. With these tools, they sculpted the hulls of their sacred canoes. Hawaiians became accomplished civil engineers. Along the coastline of their principal islands, they constructed giant fish ponds. To build the walls of these artificial lagoons, rocks were hauled over mountain ranges by chains of men in a corporate effort controlled by chiefs. The scale of their endeavor was unparalleled in the rest of Polynesia. At strategic places along the dam, wooden gates allowed young fish to be carried in by the tide. Here they fed in the rich, sheltered waters of these man-made lagoons. In time, they grew too big to escape to the open sea. For the Hawaiian fishermen, they were an easy catch. Once built, these monumental ponds provided an endless supply of fish, even during the season of storms. This technique was so successful that on the Hawaiian island of Molokai, the population gave up fishing at sea and became known as the people without nets. For them, silvery fish were the most prized, a delicacy for the noble chiefs who commissioned these simple but ingenious contraptions. Like the rest of Polynesia, Hawaiian society was governed by taboo. Women were banned from eating pork. Even the flesh of dogs was normally reserved for men. But women could eat fish and glean the reef. Collecting seaweed was their preserve. Called limu, it was nutritious and often tasty. In Hawaii, they relished 30 different species, which they ate uncooked, often with raw fish. Conversely, making and performing musical instruments was a task for men. The gourd plant, brought by the first settlers, made a resonant ipu drum. The traditional hula was a sacred dance of strict discipline, performed by men, who around each leg wore the teeth of 100 dogs. Coconut fibre, twisted into strings, made a mouth harp for amorous young men. Disguised by the gentle strumming of the ukeke, the player chanted sweet nothings in his lover's ear. Fashioned from bamboo, the design of the Hawaiian nose flute was probably brought from the Marquesas. Its haunting tone, combined with the rhythm of bamboo percussion, captured the spirit of ancient Hawaii. Generations of hard work had tamed this northern outpost of Polynesia. From wild tropical forest, the Hawaiian people created their own paradise. The expansive valleys of the main islands were cleared of trees. In their place were now terraces of taro. A regimented horticulture reflected the disciplined lives of the people. The efficient use of water to grow taro inland and to farm fish on the coast allowed the population to grow to several 100,000. No other part of Polynesia witnessed such prosperity. Each year, the people of Hawaii celebrated the festival of Makahiki. At this time, mysterious masked priests carried away the feathered image of their god Ku, god of war and human sacrifice. In place of powerful Ku, for 4 lunar months, this peaceful and generous people embraced the spirit of Lono, the benign guardian of their land. The season of Makahiki provided a vital respite for the health of the land and the sea. No man was allowed to sail his canoe or work his field. The chiefly people and their priests circled the island to collect ceremonial gifts of fruit and fish, the harvest of the land and sea. For the people of Hawaii, the Makahiki festival was a time for rest and replenishment. But despite careful management of the land, nature paid a price. Like all Polynesians, the first Hawaiians exploited the natural world around them. Preserved in the tube-like caves created by cooling flows of lava lie relics of a more ancient world that did not survive the human impact on the islands. The skulls and bones of native Hawaiian birds, made extinct by the native people of Hawaii. Generations of hunters exterminated half the endemic species of land birds, including 2 kinds of flightless ibis, 8 species of geese, and 18 different honey creepers. 40 unique species were lost forever. Where lava tubes enter the sea is the realm of the octopus. These intelligent creatures thrive in the waters of Hawaii. The lava rubble provides them with an ideal home and hunting ground. This so-called leaf fish is also a predator that waits in ambush. Its vivid color is part of its disguise. Like a piece of drifting seaweed, it gently rocks and rolls in the ocean swell. But this cunning deception does not fool the octopus. From their small outrigger canoes, Hawaiian fishermen dropped ingenious lures designed to mimic the favorite prey of octopus. The octopus is both keen-eyed and curious. It can't resist this Hawaiian speciality, the tiger cowrie. A successful lure was a fisherman's prized possession. It had to be strongly made to withstand the embrace of the octopus. Ornate lures were a feature of life throughout tropical Polynesia and became part of the islanders' stories of voyaging and discovery. One widespread and revealing legend tells of a fisherman called Kupe, who lived on the sacred island of Raiatea, near Tahiti. According to myth, a giant octopus repeatedly stole his bait. Enraged by the loss of his treasured lure, Kupe set off in pursuit of the thief. It was the lunar month of November, when fair winds sweep westwards across the Pacific. From his home in central Polynesia, the legendary Kupe sailed towards the setting sun, until after weeks of voyaging in the southern seas, he sighted a large island that he described as a land of birds. We know it as New Zealand. Fiction blends with fact. The first New Zealanders, the Maori, did come from the tropical islands of central Polynesia. In this great southern land, their lives would change dramatically. The 2 large islands of New Zealand form a landmass 4 times greater than all the other islands of Polynesia put together. Compared to oceanic islands, this land dates back to the geological beginning of time. With tropical Fiji to the north and the Antarctic to the south, This majestic landscape had existed in isolation from the rest of the world for 80 million years. On the shores of South Island live animals that truly reflect New Zealand's southerly position. Crested penguins battle with New Zealand's surf, much as the first Polynesian voyagers must have done. For people from tropical islands, these strange creatures must have been a curious and comical sight. Such birds were beyond their wildest imagination. Like Hawaii, New Zealand was a land largely free of predators. For millions of years, penguins had made their way safely ashore to breed. Large numbers of seabirds thrived on a rich and bountiful ocean. After 6 months at sea, crested penguins return in spring to nest and rear their young. It is a journey which may take them a mile inland. The middle of a forest may seem an unlikely place for a penguin colony, but it provides welcome shelter from the wind and sea. Although New Zealand's penguins don't suffer frostbite, heavy rainfall and frequent storms cause many breeding casualties. Most young penguins die in their first year. Nest building is a muddy affair, but penguins pair for life, and reinforcing their partnership is vital for the future. These birds do seem out of place in the forest, but here they can find safety from the elements, and also safety in numbers. Rearing their chicks is a long and arduous task. For 75 days, the adults make dawn expeditions to the coast. Hundreds of birds, from colonies scattered throughout the forest, gather together, each a dutiful parent, returning to the sea to seek food for its offspring. Millions of years ago, New Zealand was part of a vast southern continent that included Antarctica. It was home to dinosaurs. These Jurassic monsters became extinct long ago, but the tuatara, a living fossil, remains the sole survivor of an entire group of beak-headed reptiles that once ruled the Earth. Nightfall in New Zealand is an invitation to travel back in time. The weta is a primitive insect related to grasshoppers. This is a prehistoric encounter between predator and prey. The forest reveals other strange nocturnal creatures, none more bizarre than the flightless kiwi. By the time the Polynesians came 1,000 years ago, New Zealand had more than 30 species of flightless bird, including giant moa, twice the size of an ostrich. In time, the moa were hunted to extinction, but the kiwi still survives. Although its eyes are poor, its other senses are keen. To sniff out and feel for its prey, it has a flexible bill with nostrils at its end. Even in water, the kiwi can detect its prey. Crayfish are also active at night, and the kiwi's sensitive bill picks up the movements of its hidden quarry. New Zealand's special bird is a relic from the past, a fitting emblem of this ancient group of islands that, just as the legendary Coupe discovered, was indeed a land of curious birds. Little more than 1,000 years ago, to this land of birds and prehistoric creatures came a handful of pioneering Polynesians intent on making it their home. These people became the Maori of New Zealand. Within a generation or two, the first settlers had used their seafaring skills to travel the entire length of the two main islands, 1,000 miles north to south. To investigate the nature of their new home. Here, in temperate New Zealand, these people from the tropics encountered an unfamiliar rhythm of seasons. The climate of this immense land would be their greatest challenge. Some of its wildlife seemed familiar. Other plants and animals were totally alien to the newcomers. To plants which were similar to those of central Polynesia, they gave the same name, even if they were completely unrelated. The names are linguistic clues to the origins of the first Maori. Although not tropical, the rainforests of New Zealand had palm trees. The tough leaves of the nikau proved just as useful for making baskets and roofing as the palms of the warmer islands of Polynesia. The Maori settlers compared the flowers and fruits, the perfume and the taste, the colours of sap and the fibrous properties of the stems to find out how best to use the plant resources of the land. By trial and error, they soon discovered which plants were useful as food or medicine, or, if poisonous, how they could be used to catch birds and fish. Though not related, this plant has peppery-tasting leaves like the famed kava of the tropics, so they gave it a similar name. In New Zealand today, kawa is still used as a powerful medicine. To this challenging land, they brought their tikis and their gods. Most treasured Polynesian plants failed to survive in this cool climate. Unlike Hawaii, the soils and terrain of New Zealand were ill-suited to their traditional ways of cultivation. Pigs and chickens did not survive the voyage south, and only 6 of their cultivated plants took to New Zealand's soil and climate. Faced with starvation, they ate the roots of the native bracken fern, which, when roasted and beaten, became palatable. But a life of chewing fibrous bracken roots was brief. Their teeth wore down, and few survived beyond the age of 30. One imported root crop did succeed, at least in the warmer north. The sweet potato, intriguingly a native of South America, arrived in New Zealand with the first settlers, where they continued to call it kumara. Grown with care and stored away from frost, the tubers became a luxury food, a last link with their warm homeland in the tropics. One prized Polynesian plant that failed to flourish was the paper mulberry tree. For generations, it had been the raw material for their bark cloth fabric. Here, in this cool land, it died. In its place, the Maori found ways of using a native fibrous plant, the flax. With patience and skill, the leaves could be woven into baskets and nets, or plaited into sails. But its greatest value was as fibre for making cloth, to keep out the unaccustomed damp and cold. By stripping the plant of its cuticle and rolling its fibre into strands, they devised a technique of making a fabric for clothing, essential to life outside the tropics. To the robes of chiefs and other influential people were added the fur of dogs and the feathers of native birds. But commoners simply wore the cloth as shaggy capes, which, like thatch, shed the rain and kept out the unfamiliar cold of this new land. In summer, scouting parties crossed the southern Alps by way of mountain passes that led them towards the west coast with its rich rainforest and mineral wealth. For a people whose ancestors had lived for generations beneath blue skies and the shade of tropical palms, this bleak terrain must have felt like another planet. Up here is the realm of the kea, the world's only alpine parrot. Originally forest dwellers, these opportunist birds long ago adapted to life throughout the great range of New Zealand's landscapes. It is still one of the country's most audacious and successful birds. Long ago, keas learned to be survivors. Like the first New Zealanders who gave them their name, they had come from a warmer land. But with their innate tenacity, they had adapted and flourished. In time, this ancient land of birds, of parrots and penguins, became a homeland for people. When they reached the west coast of South Island and overlooked the ocean, the first people of New Zealand, the Maori, had reached the final corner of the Polynesian Triangle. The era of Pacific voyaging was complete. New Zealand was the last major landmass to be settled by people anywhere in the world. But it was not the end of the Polynesian story. Far beyond the distant horizon was another world. From there would come other people with a very different way of life. The splendid isolation of Kupe's land of birds was soon to end. The arrival of Europeans would herald a new chapter in the natural history of all the islands of the South Seas.
Chapter and its dramatic effect is examined in the last of the series next Sunday at 6:10 with Captain Cook's landing on the Polynesian shores. And this epic story of man and nature is now available in the BBC book, Nomads of the Wind.
The Polynesian Triangle is like an ancient spearhead thrust across the great Pacific Ocean.